What is just war? Uh, of course, the religions, I don't know for one religion that says war is excellent thing and we should enjoy war. Um, but at the same time, we have many historical events where we can see that also religious communities were cheering for the war. So just war theory is a set of ethical principles used to evaluate the morality of using military force. So all religions, as I said, has this idea that war is damaging, it's not really good. But if you have to go to war, you can employ a set of moral virtues or moral framework for determining when the war is really justified, and if you happen to be in a war, then how to do this war in a morally feasible and acceptable way. There are many religions in the world that every religion in the world had to answer this question. So from the very early religions, like the ancient Chinese, Egyptian, Babylonian, Hindu religions, they also had this idea how to make war in a just way, in a way that is morally acceptable. So we have very early mentions of this, like the Chinese philosopher Lao Tse, who said that the war should be undertaken only with the utmost reluctance and should not continue beyond the minimal point required when you have this political aim fulfilled. So you can see Lao Tse here on this slide. There is also in Hindu religion, the Book of Manu in India, that contains detailed regulation how to do this humane conduct of warfare. Most of them say the point when you are reaching the goal, you should stop violence. That is the major point. But when we talk about just war, usually in religious studies, we talk about St. Augustine. St. Augustine was one of the leading Christian theologian of early Christianity. And the whole Western idea of just war traces its roots to Augustine. It is not one theory. So when we say just war theory, it's more like a modern version of what we want to say. But he did had some kind of theoretical frameworks how to explain the just war. One was jus ad bellum, or justice of war, which seeks to specify principles that define the right of one sovereign power to engage in violent action against another. So he says there are some cases, there are some instances when a ruler, whatever the ruler is, it might be a king or it might be democratically chosen leader. So there are some principles that say, okay, now is the time when this person does not have any other possibility but to enter the war. And then there is jus in bello, which means justice in war, which says when you enter the war, there are some morally acceptable principles of conduct that you should abide to. So basically, we have two instances here. One is when is the right time to go into war? And second is, if you go to war, what can you do? It is tightly connected to the idea of justice. What does it mean? Justice in Christianity, but also in other religions, is mostly connected to the relative justice, which means that there are things that we can understand. There are things that we think is good. But this good thing is only relative because we don't understand what God wants from us. So the relative justice is something that is available to humans. And it's always connected to the virtues or the principles of moral conduct, which the first principle and the first virtue in Christianity is love. So from love, you can you can you can understand what is good and what is not good, what is evil, like he says in his work on two cities. One city is good and one city is evil. There is always this interconnection between them. So the consequences of having good and evil is that the state of human being, the state of human existence, is based on the will of God. So everything that the organization of the human society does by St. Augustine and by so many other theologians and political systems in the history is that it is a divinely appointed purpose. So it is upon the people to understand if some situation is just or not. But at the same time, the people themselves, the human society itself, cannot judge absolute justice. So we think about relative justice. So we think, okay, someone attacks us, we have the right to respond. We have the right to, it is just thing to protect oneself. Yeah. So the just war is, in this opinion, the rightful path of good people and punishment of bad ones. I will tell you what does it mean. So he positions several let's say several conditions of what it is a just war. First of all, you have to have the just cause. Usually this is defense, as I said. So defense of innocent against armed attack, recovery of persons and property that is wrongly taken, or what is very interesting, punishment of evil. Of course, evil is always determined and defined very subjectively. And that's what Augustine also says. It's a relative thing. You don't know really what does it mean. So it is just cause to protect the safety or honor of the state, to avenge injuries, or to punish a nation for failure to take cooperative actions committed by citizens, and to defend one's allies. But what is very important is that the just war is against evil. Yeah. So what is evil? Evil, by how Augustine defines it in war, is the love of violence. So if someone is taking the war just because enjoys the violence, if one is cruel in this warfare, if one is positioning the things in such a way that does not ask for friendliness in the end. So the total destruction of the enemy, of wild resistance, the lust to have power after the war, this is evil. So this is the war that cannot be just. And defensive wars are morally permissible, but at the same time, if they take punitive action, so if you have a revenge, then it also is not morally acceptable. And Augustine also says that God sometimes directs or authorizes war to be fought, and these wars are just. It is just even if you think they are evil. For example, he is mentioning wars in Old Testament, which these wars are really bloody. I would say they're very vicious. They're very revengeful. But because the Old Testament considers them as justified because God authorizes them, then it is just. This is something that in the history of Christianity was very much discussed about. And Augustine himself recognizes that it is not really good to, it's not really easy to understand this concept of just war, but you have to have faith in God. If it is a proclaimed truth of God, then you have to have the faith that it is just. Um, so this is what I was talking about here. So the Augustine assumed that the just war can eventually be only one side. So he's very in this term he's even Manichaean, I would say. There is a big dichotomy here. One side is bad, the other side is good. But this comparative justice today is very, very minority view. So this is not something that we can accept today. So there is the possibility to have understanding of just war from both sides or whatever side there is, and of course for every side there is an enemy, and an enemy is always someone who is very bad, who is evil. But at the same time, you have evil and bad. You have good and bad things on all sides. So how to understand this? This is something that in the comparative justice is an answer to some things that Saint Augustine did not really cared about, so to say. Another conception is right intention. So if you go to a war, and if you want this war to be morally justified, you have to have the right intention. The right intention is not about the war itself. The war is bad by itself. So that's not the right intention. If you go to the war because you like warfare, no, that's a big no. So, what is the right intention? It is pursuing peace negotiation to avoid war. So, if you can do whatever is necessary to avoid war, you are on the right track. If you cannot avoid war, then it means that you did not have reasonable demands to avoid war. And this is also morally interesting and necessary position. So it doesn't mean, okay, I'm being very plain here. You attack a village, and this village says we cannot offer you any wealth, or I don't know, cattle or properties that can satisfy your demand. So uh, we cannot reach your demand, and then you attack these people. That's not reasonable. So you cannot, that is morally wrong. But if someone attacks you and you cannot give them anything for their demands, and uh, and they attack you, you have the justifiable and ethically morally right to oppose their attack. But I will tell you later, there are some more rules about this. So right intention is not territorial expansion, it's not intimidation, it's not coercion, it's not a hatred of enemy, it's not animosity, it's not desire for vengeance or domination. Recall all the wars that we have today, and you will see that most of them are not just, because they do not fall in this category. However, it is impossible to engage in violence with the proper intent, because violence and Christian love do not condone each other. So Augustine says that in the end, if you go into violence, even if it is justifiable, you still go against God, and you still go against Christian love. So that is where you have this additional commands. So first of all, of these additional commands is competent authority. So authority rests with the sovereign ruler. That is also a bit of a problem, of course, because the sovereign authority should, as Augustine says, it should always be answerable to God, but not to his subjects. That is very interesting. So you're not, as a position of ruler, the ruler is answerable to God, but not to the people that he governs with. Of course, we can understand this in many ways. The historical development understood it as that the ruler, especially the king, the sovereign ruler, is not answerable to people, so he can do whatever he wants. And because he can do whatever he wants, he did it under the guise of having God beside him. That is not what Augustine was telling. Augustine says you are answerable to God by moral duty. So if you do not answer to God in moral way, then you are not a ruler. You're not capable to be a king. And this is also based on the history of Old Testament, especially to, for example, if you recall the story of King Saul, the first king of Israelites, who, when he started to claim that he's answerable to God only, but not to his people, in terms that he's above the people, then he was already not a king. And in the end, he died. Of course, he committed a suicide because of his state of the mind. Another level is that the war can only be the last resort when all the other reasonable means are avoided, are exhausted. Then you can go into war. And it is not just that you say, oh, they don't agree, so we will now attack them, or the attackers, the aggressors, they're saying something that we cannot accept, so then we will start fighting. No. The prevailing circumstances, as said here, the prevailing circumstances must clearly indicate that there is absolutely no other way but war to obtain the goal. But what is this goal? The goal must be just, and it must have right intention. And when you reach any of these things, immediately you have to cease the violence. You have to cease the war. Another thing is that the war must be publicly proclaimed. And before you start the war, you have to have the ultimatum. This ultimatum sets all the things that are available, all the things that where you can reach some kind of agreement short of war. So this public declaration was probably, when St. Augustine was writing it, I think it was also Augustine was never mentioned it, but I think it was a standard process in the Roman Empire. So whenever the Romans went to war, they publicly declared this war before they went to it. And they made a number of instances. And if you did not accept these preconditions, then the war could start. It was not that you just attack. That was not Roman style. And I think Augustine had this idea in his mind when he was writing these things. Another thing is that if the war presents little or no hope of success, if you go into war or if you defend yourself, but you know that there will be no success, then it is morally not justifiable. Why? Because if you know that there is a person, if there is a possibility, a big possibility, or if there is a war where an enemy will attack you, and you know that you're not capable to defend yourself. Also, there are so many heroic scenes in the history, heroic events when a small number of people was defending and did succeed. This is like what, like 2% of world history in the war, so it is very minor place, but we remember it as a heroic thing, of course. But if you go into the war, if you defend or attack, but you cannot defend the people, you cannot defend the property of the people, then you're not doing a morally acceptable thing. You are basically contributing to the death of many people. And of course, this is very shaky. This is very prone to debate. But this is what the reasonable probability of success is by St. Augustine. Um, uh, so this the idea of proportionality is also a bit, debatable. But he says the moral good expected to result from the war must exceed the amount of evil expected naturally and unavoidably to be entailed by war. So he says that if you go into war, even if you defend yourself, if you go into war, the result must be much better than the amount of evil that is going on in the war. Again, this means that um, the war where 90% of your people will die just to have a success in war is not justified. It's not justified. So you killed so many people from your side, and how many people in the other side, and um, and and for what? The evil, in fact, the evil thing prevailed. All wars have to have the ultimate objective of peace. So the lasting peace is the proper object of all wars. And I would like to tempt you in the Q&As, the question and answers, to tell me how many wars do you know today in the world that have peace as their ultimate objective. By saying this, by having this question in rhetorical sense, I would say every single one of war that is being fought in the world today or in history has peace as their ultimate objective. But what is the really peace of as ultimate objective war? This is also what Augustine was saying. Many are saying the same thing, but only few of them really want peace as ultimate objective. Also, this is something that is present in many religions. Just war has minimum force of violence, minimum violence. So this is what is just war is. So the just war cannot be proportional to causing violent suffering and harm, torture, or some kind of weapon. So it means that when you attack from the just position, or you involve in war from just position, you cannot cause the same proportion of violence to other side. That is morally wrong. Uh, so Augustine says, and this is something that is also present in many other religious teachings, war should be limited by military necessity. Only what you have to do for military necessity. So only, like for example, you want to conquer one hill. That is justifiable. But if you want to conquer one hill and then destroy a village there, that is not justifiable. That's ethically completely wrong. Also, Augustine says when you attack, let's go again to this thing. So you conquer a hill. It's geographically and geopolitically important thing, but you cannot enter this village. It's morally unacceptable because in this village, if you do not fight a military force, then you fight wounded soldiers, prisoners of war, clergymen like me, women not in the military, children, the aged, and the infirm. These people, if you attack them, this is morally completely unacceptable. They are not warriors. If you attack them, it means that it is not justifiable in a religious sense. Augustine was very influential in the West, and as he says, even if war is terrible, it can be just and order. It just if it's done through proximity to God. So if it falls into the Christian teachings, even if you defend yourself, it can be just. So this is something that is influential even today because in many wars today, even if you are extremely aggressive and if it's like the thing that you immediately see that it is not just, still, even in dictatorships and the lunatics who wage wars, you still have this idea that you have to um, you have to give a justifiable cause. You have to justify this war, and it always has to be some kind of good thing. Of course, it is a fake. It is hypocrisy, but the Augustine influence in the Western world is such that you cannot wage war if it doesn't have some kind of justification. I will go now briefly to Islam and to Judaism. So also there is no comprehensive theory of just war in Islam as there is no in Christianity. You know, this is all just a combination of many teachings. But of course, many discussions today, especially, it's about jihad, and there is like the jihadist movement or whatever that means. It is theologically, it is not really something that is correct, because jihad in Arabic is a word for struggle, and it is not word for war. War is harb. So jihad is not always about the violent act, but it is more about spiritual struggle. And when we talk about misunderstanding of jihad, it is not only about the non-Islamic world, it is also about Islamic world. So the many organizations that are calling for jihad do not understand what jihad really is. It is, by Quranic verse, it is the struggle to make God's cause succeed. So it is basically a good thing. It is something that you do things right. If you go and help the poor, this is jihad. If you go to build a hospital, this is jihad. And in Islamic theology, it is much more accepted than the warfare in the means of arms. Only the proper authority can say what is just thing in war, and it as it says, it includes prohibitions on cheating, treachery, mutilation, and the killing of children. So there's some similarities with Augustine. There are many. I will very briefly go through here because I did this for purposes that you can read when I send it again. You can read about it. But the first juridical perspective on the war in Islam came from this guy Abu Yusuf. Uh, he said so. So this is a very standard thing. Um, in the history of Islam, and I have to say it's history of Christianity as well. Don't understand me wrong. The thing is that you want to spread your faith, and if you cannot spread this faith in the way that people accept it freely, you will do it by force. Yeah, it's the classic history of Christianity and Islam. But Abu Yusuf says that you cannot vote a tribe until you first tell them about Islam. So you have to first give them the opportunity to convert. You have to give them freedom to say yes or no. And only if they say no, you can fight them. It might seem harsh, of course, but it has some kind of theological logic behind it. The war that you is conditioned on summoning the enemy, if there is enemy is already there. But if the enemy already heard about Islam and already heard about this teaching, then and they said no, then you can attack them. So it doesn't mean that they will convert them eventually. Also, this is something that happened many times, but it doesn't mean that. It means that you have freedom from Islamic perspective to attack them. Yeah. The same thing came with the teachings of one of the very famous Islamic philosophers, Ibn Rushd, who also says you cannot fight the enemy unless summoned to Islam first. What is interesting is that this is only about polytheists, not about the people of the book. So people of the book can be attacked only if they either refuse to convert to Islam or they refuse to pay the Islamic tax for the non-Muslims. But this is only for the Jews, Christian, and Zoroastrians. So the Imam has the authority to free, enslave, or kill enemy hostages, release them on ransom, or impose on them the jizya except monks. These things, as I said in the beginning, these are not very solid frameworks. This is not something that was the law that was going on all the time. Yeah. So we have to understand this as a concept of the rule of that time. So the rule was based on Islamic governance, and anybody who was present in this state should either pay the tax or should be converted or should be killed. So that was the thing. The same thing happened in Christian world also. When we are talking about Shia Islam, which is a special branch of Islam, it was only the Imam who had the right to define war, administer its execution. So you had this several Imams who were more or less they followed the same idea that I was explaining before. Later in Islamic periods, so after the golden time of Islam, jihad was uprooted. So it was it had a concept that required a struggle for proper belief and decent religious conduct. And because of this, they were vehemently against many other Islamic denominations, especially Shia denominations. And one of the persons who rised up and is important even today for understanding many so-called jihadic movements is Ibn Taymiyyah, who followed the dogmatic understanding of just war, because the just war is not only against non-Muslims, but it is also against apostates or hypocrites, as he called them, everyone who descended from the Sunnah, from the tradition, and straight from Sharia or the Islamic law. Fiqh. Sufi is more or less very, let's say, mystic. I don't like to use this term, but mystic Islam, mystic tradition. They were more into the understanding of jihad as a tool to fight the so it was inner jihad. It is the struggle against one's own will, one's own temptations, to foster more the faith. So one of the very famous Sufi scholars and philosophers, Al-Ghazali, said the jihad is the path of God to fasting, monotheism, invocation of God, hardship caused by caring for one's own parents and children, charity, commanding right and forbidding wrong. So this is what I was telling you. If you build a hospital, this is jihad. If you care for old people, it's jihad. Yeah? So this is what Sufi Islam is very focused on. I will skip this. It's more or less the same thing. What I could say is that jihad also can mean defense of religion, but also maintaining social order. So it's again pervasive everywhere. The just use of violence can be within the Islamic society if you cannot maintain social order. We can talk about common practices today, but we always have to have in mind that these rules have been made in a period that we don't live in. So we have to have a historical perspective of these things. There are many instances in Holy Quran about the war and about the duty to fight. There's so many inconsistencies also. So what is the duty? It's a punishment, but at the same time, it is not. It's forbidden. Historically, there is, of course, many battles between Christians and Muslim armies. But at the same time, there is a huge tradition of diplomacy and truces, and this is the maslaha, the will of Muslim and Christian leaders to avoid war, and also reluctance to go to war. Now, to go to war even today, and especially at that time, it's a huge endeavor. So if you go to war, you have to be really sure that why do you want to go to war? Because if you're not sure, you will end bankrupt and probably killed. So the best way was not to go to war, and you had to find some kind of balance between enemy and whatever is going on, and this reluctance to go to war. I live in a country that was borderline for most of its history between Christianity and Islam. And I know that as much as we have instances of warfare in our past for centuries, we also had instances of huge cooperation, because otherwise everybody would be killed. There are some modern views about jihad. I was thinking about some of it, but I will skip this for the brevity of time. So There are some other thinkers about revolutionary ideology. Yes, 50 minutes, yes. And there are some, so the Indian Pakistani thinker Abu Allah Maududi, he had revolutionary ideology that included possibility of violence. The Egyptian Said Qutb declared that ignorance of Jahiliyyah was enough thing to go into war. He is pictured here because he was in prison in Egypt. And some of his ideas also could never really advocated directly for violence. Some of his ideas was taken by modern neo-Salafism and Takfirism as terrorist agendas. Muslim Brotherhood and Hassan al-Banna, who is here, also declared that jihad is the duty of every Muslim, but it is also something that is interpreted and reinterpreted all the time. Liberals were more comprehensive and they were more into thinking that just war is only limited to repelling aggression, protecting the summons to Islam, and preserving the liberty of practicing religion. Judaism also doesn't have the just war idea. It is more also, again, a combination of many thinkings. War is never desirable, even when it is necessary. This is general idea. What is interesting is that Judaism is influencing both Christianity and Islamic theologies in understanding the God's commandment of in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments, which does not say in the Hebrew translation, it does not say do not kill, but do not murder. So what does it mean? And now even today we are struggling, the theologians struggle about this. So it means that the killing itself is not really forbidden. We have capital punishment in many Islamic countries. We have capital punishment in the United States. So it doesn't mean you cannot kill under the certain rule, but you should not murder, which is completely something different. So this is also something that is being discussed. Again, I will not go into detail because this is something that is taken from Christian and also Muslim views. So the civilians cannot be harmed. Neighbors cannot be harmed. There are some rabbis in the rabbinic Judaism who completely, absolutely forbid killing. And there is some ideas, what does it mean to have preemptive defense, preemptive defense to preserve the integrity of the land. I don't want to go into discussion about contemporary conflict between Israel and Palestine, but the preemptive defense is something that is really, really important here from the Jewish perspective. And I don't mean Jewish by state, but by the religion, because Jewish as a state and Judaism as the religion have some differences. There were also several thinkers and several philosophers, especially Shlomo Yitzhaki or Rashi and Maimonides, who were very influential for contemporary Judaism. And they assessed that the just war is the one that saves Israel from an oppressor, exactly as it is described in the Bible and nothing else. I have to say that both of them lived in a Muslim environment. So they had this idea, the idea of only protection in the realm of living as a minority under the Muslim rule. Sorry. So the Jewish law does not say much about the just war or war in every kind. Um, most of this came also under the influence of where the Jews lived. They lived in not in Middle East. They lived in Europe. So one of the very famous ideas is the one of Rabbi Judah Löw in Prague in the 17th century, who was saying about how non-combatants should not be fought against. When the modern Israeli state came to be, then a novel idea of just war came within Judaism, like one of the very famous, I would say, ideologues of just war in modern Judaism is Chief Rabbi of Tel Aviv, Moshe Victor Amiel, who in 1948 ruled that warfare during the Sabbath is permissible, which is like, this is a revolutionary thought. On Sabbath, you cannot do anything. You cannot even move. You cannot even put the light on. But it's permissible to kill the enemy, but not kill the civilians. So this history of Israeli defense created the Jewish ethics of war, especially with Shlomo Goren, who was one of the important guys who was he did a lot about preemptive attack, the ideology of preemptive attack. Uh, the doctrine, the official doctrine of the Israel Defense Forces today is Tohra HaNeshech, or purity of arms, where the soldiers will use their weapons and force only for their mission, only to the necessary extent, and will maintain their humanity even during combat. So again, I don't want to impose on you discussion, but you can think about if it is true today for the Israel Defense Forces. So that is it. And I am very free to